2015 is drawing to an end.
So it's time to look back on the year in tech and forward to the year to come. Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm here with a man who I suspect is about to feel very, very confused, Adam Turner, as well as special guest star, finder.com.au editor-in-chief, Angus Kidman. Angus, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and I look forward to confusing everybody, and especially Adam.
What? What's going on here? Have you learned to throw your voice?
Not quite. Adam, what's new in tech?
The legal battle to unmask Australians who illegally downloaded the movie Dallas Buyers Club seems to be drawing to an end. Earlier this year, the judge granted copyright owner Voltage Pictures the right to demand contact details for suspected pirates, but only under strict conditions designed to prevent it sending out speculative invoices demanding thousands of dollars from suspected pirates in order to avoid a pesky lawsuit. Voltage Pictures has spent months arguing in court for a better deal, but now the judge plans to throw out the case completely in February if an agreement can't be reached. If this happens, Voltage Pictures will be forced to pay IONET's legal costs.
Telstra has announced that its heavily hyped Telstra Air public Wi-Fi service will be free for just about every Telstra customer until at least mid-next year. That's free to access and free of data charges, which means if you play your data cards right, Telstra might for the first time ever be Australia's cheapest mobile broadband provider.
UberX is finally legal in New South Wales, with the government offering a $250 million compensation package to the taxi industry, which will be paid in part for by a $1 surcharge on taxi and ride-sharing trips. Ride-sharing drivers will also pay a one-off driver authority fee and an annual registration fee, but still won't be able to pick up passengers from taxi ranks.
Google has announced that it'll launch Google Pay in Australia in the first half of 2016 with a number of prominent Australian banks. It will sit in direct competition to Apple Pay, which has already launched in Australia, but only with American Express issued cards. 2016 should also see the local launch of Samsung Pay, meaning there's going to be even more ways to pay with your credit card without the card bit. So it looks like the Dallas Buyers Club case is going to be thrown out of court. Does this mean that we can now pirate all the things?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's not a win for pirates. The judge hasn't turned around and said, okay, I've changed my mind, it's alright to download stuff. All that's happened is the judge has got so sick of the rubbish that's coming from Voltage Pictures that he said, look, if you can't get your act together, I'm just going to chuck the whole thing out. Because he said to them in the beginning, I'm not just going to give you open slather to ask people for, $1 million if you don't, unless you want to be taken to court. And they didn't like these conditions, so they kept arguing and taking him back to court, and he said, fine, I've told you the rules, so if you don't want to follow them, I'm going to chuck the whole thing.
So, Angus, do you reckon this is the judge throwing the toys out of the pram? Does he have a point? And what's it really going to mean?
Well, I think the judge definitely has a point, because what he pointed out very pithily was that, this whole thing was an application for preliminary discovery. We haven't even established that anyone did anything wrong at this point. So I really think what he said is, well, this is just trying to establish you've even got a basis to try and do something, and you're doing a really poor job of it. What worries me, there's been a lot of kind of elation online about this, and I think everyone's so obsessed with this case that they've forgotten that there's still a parallel process going on where they're trying to develop a general approach that would apply to every single ISP and every single movie. That's stalled because it turns out that the federal government's not very good at estimating how long it would take to get people to agree to that stuff.
Who guessed?
Yeah, but, it's still...
Seems unusual for them.
Yeah, that's still going on. We've signed a free trade agreement with America, which essentially says, hey, yeah, we're going to kind of let your intellectual property rules trample ours a bit. So while I think it's good that this particular idiotic case is getting bounced, I don't think there's any room for celebrating or even thinking that we've got a particularly sensible future ahead of us in this area.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even necessarily getting bounced, it's just that there's a time frame in which it will be bounced if nothing else is done. They can still appeal it if they choose to go down that path. Technically speaking, although I do feel it's unlikely, they could actually go back to what the judge had originally said, which was a $600,000 bond and, reasonable to moderate costs if that's what they wanted to chase up. There's still that option open to them as well.
Yeah, the ball is still totally in their court. They can still take the original thing. And as Gus was saying, in the long run, there's other things going on that are going to overtake this, and this might not have that big an impact. But you could argue that it has had an impact in terms of the long game, because it's this case that's really helped bring this issue to a head, get everybody to the table and put together the new scheme that we've got coming with, 3 strikes notices and blocking websites, and all of that might have dragged on for longer had this case not been happening. So you could argue that this was kind of the thing that pushed it all along.
You could also argue that the world now is not the world the court case started in. When this court case began, you couldn't get Netflix, Presto or Stan. All of those things exist now. The ability to get content legally is a lot easier than it was. I haven't seen masses of evidence that that's lowered piracy rates, but it's a different world that we're living in.
So 2015 is pretty much all but done in tech terms. There's unlikely to be any massive new product releases and maybe not too much more news to go on. So it's time to kind of look back at both the best and the worst. So starting on the optimistic side, what do we think the best bits of tech for 2015 have been?
Look,
that's what grabbed your eye.
You've got to give a thumbs up to Windows 10. Like, Windows 8 had been, from a general reception point of view, an unmitigated disaster. It was actually not as bad as people thought it was, but people hated it. It was getting thrown out of the way. And yeah, Windows 10 came along, and on the whole, people like it. It's made Windows look like a serious contender again. Combine that with running on the Surface in particular, proving that matching your hardware and your software is a good idea. I think you've got to credit that as one of the big success stories of the year, even if the only way to get everyone to adopt it was to make it free and then aggressively throw pop-ups at you all the time. But I think Microsoft deserved credit for kind of acknowledging that some of the things they'd done were wrong, bringing back the start menu, getting things done. So for me, that made for an interesting and perhaps unexpected development in that space.
Well, they were due for a good one. We always know they have a good one and a bad one and a good one and a bad one. We had XP was alright, we had 7 was alright, so it was time for them to come good.
It was, but at the same time, the competitive landscape is nothing like it used to be before. Every other time,
True.
There's never been a serious alternative. The serious alternative for a lot of people now is either not to look at their computer at all, or to use Macs, which are used in much higher numbers than they've been, in the many, many decades that I've been a tech journalist. So I think there was still, there was every chance they were going to screw it up, but I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah, and I mean, it was that interesting tactical shift where they basically said, look, we just want to get everyone on this code base. We want to get everyone we can possible on Windows 10, so everyone please have it. And that, of course, was a bit of an alarm bell in a sense of, ooh, do we really want it? But the answer turned out pretty much, I think, unanimously, at least across all three of us, to be, yes, we did.
I'd still say if you're a non-tech savvy person and you're, running 7 or something like that, stick with what you've got until you buy your next computer. If your computer's still running XP, set it on fire, dump it in the creek and buy something new. But I wouldn't recommend to your average person who, especially if you've got old hardware and software that might not work with Windows 10, if what you got's not broke, don't fix it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that covers operating systems nicely. What about, smartphones are obviously a big, hot category. If we each had to pick a best smartphone of the year, and there were a lot of contenders in this space, what would we pick? Adam?
I'm going to be boring and say the iPhone 6s, but to be honest, I didn't look at that many smartphones this year, which probably tells you it's getting to that point in the smartphone cycle where they're not so all new and exciting and interesting now, so I don't make an effort to look at as many as I do. I've been looking at things like 3D printers and 360-degree cameras because they're new and it's the first few of them. But I'm kind of boring. I'll stick with the iPhone.
Okay, I mean, I would go with the 6S, and I like iOS as an operating system, but the battery life on the 6S especially
it's a dog.
is just a dog. It's terrible. It's terrible. Come on, when even Apple are actually bringing out their own smart battery case, it's kind of an admission of, we didn't quite get that one quite
the
right.
ugliest battery case in Christendom.
Oh yeah. Look, for my money, and this surprises me because when the first one came out, I actually didn't think that much of it. The Galaxy S6 Edge Plus, which I still maintain is quite hard to say, is the phone I've liked the most over this year, and that kind of surprises me because I didn't think that much of the original Edge. And to be honest,
one with the curved screen on the side?
It is. Yeah. It is. And to be honest, they don't do that much with the curved screen. But the whole package fits together really well. It's really nice and powerful. The battery life is good. It's a really good example of a really good premium phone. And maybe an honourable mention to the Nexus 6P because that's also a really, really nice phone. And of course, it's got that lovely clean Android interface and you'll get all the updates, which means that when the security bugs come along, you're probably getting those squashed first, because with so many other handsets, you're just not getting them squashed at all. What about you, Gus?
Well, I tend to agree with Adam. Like, it was a year of consolidation. You didn't go, wow, there's an amazing phone that just blows everything out of the water. Everything was very much a bit of a success of the last year's design, bit thinner, maybe a bit chunky. The one I think that stuck out for me amongst a sea of fairly good phones, it's not like I thought there was a lot of rubbish, was actually the Xperia Z5, just because I thought they really took the camera side of it seriously. Worked quite hard on that, and if you were serious about carrying something around, that was a good piece of equipment. So that was probably the one that jumped out at me when I thought, oh, I don't know whether there's much room in this market. So I think it established that there's still competition in the Android space, and it's not totally a Samsung market at this point.
Yeah, it's funny. Sony's had some really, really good phones over the past couple of years that just kind of haven't quite reached that peak. But I agree with you. The Z5's generally a very, very good device. I'm testing the Z5 Premium at the moment, and it's that little bit better again. And it's a solid contender, but in a sense, I don't know, the market has sort of spoken and said if it's not a Galaxy, if it's not an iPhone, we're not that interested, which is a bit sad, because I think you do miss out on some of these different takes on Android that can actually be, or different takes on a smartphone, I should say, that can actually be really kind of inviting and interesting. What about in kind of other tech, any other gadgets that have excited us over the year?
At fear of looking like an Apple fanboy, can I say the Apple TV? The new Apple TV?
You can say the new Apple TV. People may lynch you for it, but you can say the new Apple TV.
It runs Plex. Shut up and take my money. That's it. It runs Plex. And it runs it beautifully. It's maybe, I think, probably the most eloquent, beautiful Plex client I've seen on anything. I've seen some hideous Plex clients, even as good as Plex is. For those who don't know what the hell I'm talking about, Plex lets you set up a server on your computer or your network drive, then you put all your entertainment library on there, and then it advertises a bit like DLNA, except it actually works properly, unlike DLNA, which is a bit hit and miss. So you fire up Plex on your phone or your TV or your computer or whatever, and it goes, oh, there's your server, and transcodes everything on the fly. It's kind of like your own personal Netflix. Everything that you've got available pretty much everywhere you want it to be.
So for the people who think that Plex is just way, way too confusing, and there's plenty of them out there, in a similar vein, I'd give a bit of a shout out to the Telstra TV as a device that would just sensibly let you access all the existing streaming services and with an Australian focus. We've had no shortage of set-top boxes that would potentially serve you up YouTube or Netflix, but the ability to have the local contenders, to have the stands and the Prestos on there in what's generally a pretty seamless environment, I think worked well. It's not perfect. Yeah, some of the clients are not as good as others. Cough, cough, Presto. But on the whole, I think that's an interesting device, and I think we're going to see a lot of interest in those kind of things for the general market kind of going out over the next year.
Yeah, definitely the Telstra TV deserves a mention. It's when you do what we do and you're used to the technical stuff and the high-end stuff, it's easy to dismiss something like that and go, oh, that's just mainstream rubbish. If you know what you're doing, you wouldn't want one of them. But the point is that most people are mainstream people. That's why it's called mainstream. For your average punter, the Telstra TV is a really good solution, assuming you've got Telstra as your ISP. It is a really good solution.
Yeah. While we're talking things that stream, I'm going to take a slightly sideways glance at this one, in that my pick for that would oddly enough be the Xbox One. And I know that's not, strictly speaking, a 2015 piece of tech, but what Microsoft did with it this year in terms of its overall ecosystem made it an excellent streaming box, because you can access just about everything with it now, but also made it a much more useful box when you combine it with a Windows 10 PC, because it can stream game content to it. So if your main TV is being used, you just plug a controller into your PC and you're away, and it works. And this is what really surprised me, because Sony's tried this for years with the PS Vita and the PlayStation TV, and it always crashes. And it's not 100% flawless. It can blip and go, but the Xbox One solution for that is so much better, so much smoother in my experience, and it's actually meant that I've spent an awful lot of time playing games on my Xbox One via a laptop this year. And that was a quirky thing that they added to it that really kind of enhanced its overall usability, I think. I guess the other big streaming, because that's kind of where we're at the moment, thing this year that really hit, there was a big story for Australia in 2015, was of course the March launch of Netflix.
Or the launch of Netflix years ago, depending on whether or not you know how to beat deep geo-blocking.
Yeah, but it's interesting that, again, as much as geo-blocking was possible, and we knew that there was, as much as Netflix denied it, there was probably something in the order of 300,000 Australians, say, who were doing that. But now there's 1.2 million Australians who are paying for it. So it's a reminder that convenience really is there. If you can just pay for it, that's simple.
Were paying for it, they were just paying Netflix.
Well, yes. Yeah. But I think
it's the same, probably tax-avoiding dollars. But,
yeah.
But no, I mean, they managed to kind of grow a market overnight. And it seems to be an even larger growing market. Stan put out their figures, and I think they're 500,000, if I remember correctly, something around that number.
They're saying, well, 500,000 have sampled it. They're not saying how many are paying on an ongoing basis.
So that sounds a little ambitious to me.
Yeah, there have been 500,000 people who've signed up, and I can believe that. They're more cautious. Netflix doesn't put out its own numbers, so those numbers then get based on Nielsen's research, but I think that is paying people, not just sampling people. So I haven't heard a lot from Presto on this front, but evidently people are using it. It's still growing, stuff's still happening. So...
And if nothing else, it's good to have that competitive market there. If we only had Netflix, whilst they've got a nice selection of stuff, having someone they've got to compete with kind of keeps them honest, keeps everyone offering different things up, whilst at the same time, of course, inviting that problem that we talked about before, that no one streaming service has everything that you possibly want.
Yes, but at $30 a month, who cares? If you've got all three of them, why does it matter?
But it then starts to get closer and closer to what you might pay for Foxtel, and people start to say the whole point is I wanted to pay $10 a month for one thing to have everything, and we know it doesn't work that way, but Netflix was pitched at people for a long time as the holy grail. It has everything you want, and then they discovered the hard way it doesn't. But I think there are always going to be people who just... It looks like it's turning into the new form of pay TV. Oh, you want this, you'll have to pay for another service instead of another channel.
I think it'll rationalise, because it's still my long-standing contention that we won't have 3 big ones in Australia, we'll have 2.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good call.
Putting aside quick flicks, I think...
As we all have.
Well, they deserve a mention, but putting aside quick flicks, the 3 that you're left, I don't see how Stan and Presto will continue to survive. It's funny, there's been talk in the industry recently of maybe we should work together. It's like, really? I've never heard anyone suggest that before. Where do you come up with these crazy ideas? But they hate each other's guts. 7 and 9 would rather slash each other's throats than work together to fight Netflix, and so they got what basically was coming to them.
And on the other side of the Stan Presto equation, you've got Fairfax and News, who don't often see eye to eye.
That's true. Yeah, that is true as well. So you've got a whole lot of people in there who've got no interest in sharing their toys and playing nicely, even though there is an 800-pound gorilla not just knocking on the door, but already basically sitting on top of them.
Yes.
So the question is, does one buy the other? Do they merge? Does one just die? I think it's a question of how, not if.
Well, and I think that it always feels to me like, as well as it, is that Presto's there because Foxtel feel they've got to have something, but at the end of the day, they'd still rather you bought a Foxtel subscription.
Yeah.
For them, that's the main game, and they have the rights because of Foxtel, and that's kind of how they can stream content onto there.
Presto's definitely priced to sell Foxtel, essentially speaking.
Yes.
But they've also got a nice content library, and I think they've got deeper pockets. If I had to put money on which one I thought was not going to be around in a couple of years' time, I'd be more worried about Stan disappearing than Presto, I think.
I think the underpinning financials are weird, although I noticed that in that list of companies that's just come out about companies that pay no tax in Australia, Nine's one of them. So
really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
So that's an interesting insight. Fairfax was paying tax.
Yeah.
News wasn't paying tax, but that's hard to work out because that's all a US holding company anyway, so that doesn't necessarily feel much. But yeah, it makes you wonder.
Yeah. Obviously, Warney's got a lot of tax deductions.
And on that slightly pessimistic note, why don't we flip around to the worst tech news, the worst tech products. What's really sucked in 2015 for you guys?
People are bagging hoverboards, and I can understand that, A, because they don't actually hover and they're not boards, but also they just seem to have this habit of catching on fire. The one I tested...
Or breaking your neck, or giving you concussions.
We know at least 2 journos who've hurt themselves.
Yeah, maybe they've just got a thing against journos, but I'm not inclined to stand on one just in case they've been programmed that way.
No. I struggled with one. My family, we all tested one out, and my son did the best at it. He was the one who looked like he was ice skating, doing loop-de-loops and stuff like that, and I looked like I was ice skating without the ice skates. But they're not feasible as a transportation tool. You know, even the things about the fact that they're not actually legal to use on the road or the footpath, the side. They're big and clunky and heavy, and what the hell do you do it when you get there? And what happens when you ride down the street and you fall in front of a truck, etc., etc., etc.
Essentially speaking, I think if you want a hoverboard, wait 6 months and they'll be $50 on Gumtree as everyone tries to unload the Christmas presents they got given this year.
Yes.
I think so. And it just, it's not a good solution. It just, when I see them floating around, okay, to me it just looks like a badly truncated Segway. There's an experience where Alex and I were racing on Segways some years ago, and I managed to prove that theory that you can't make one fall over is absolute rubbish.
Yes, I believe I was there.
And I just feel like, this is.
But I believe you kept all of your teeth. You didn't get concussed or break an arm or anything like that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I didn't injure myself at hoverboard levels, but it really does feel like history repeating to me in that way.
I'm also a bit worried about 3D printers just because they're getting so cheap. I've just been testing the new DaVinci Junior, which you'll pick up for about $600, and they've stripped so many features out of it compared to even the one that costs a couple of $100 more, that I think people are setting themselves up for disappointment. If you buy one of these and think it's going to do what they do in the movies, you're really disappointed. You need to do a lot of research before you spend any money on any kind of 3D printer. But these budget ones are just stripping out. I think they're losing the plot and stripping out too much along the way.
It annoys me, actually, because the 3D printing thing is something that I'm quite passionate about. But we seem to have hit this point where, instead of an inflection point where so many people are picking them up, that there's that pressure to make them better and cheaper, which we had with, regular printers many, many years ago. Instead of that, they seem to have gone, oh, well, there's not enough people buying them, so we'll just make some more kind of cheap rubbish ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we've missed a trick here in that 3D printing should have picked up a lesson from what's happening more broadly in enterprise tech, which is they shouldn't be things that you have to own and have at home. They should be as a service. This should be you go down to your local hackerspace or you go down to a local shopping centre or whatever. You've designed something and then you can print on a nice bit of gear as you need to. Like maybe Officeworks should be pursuing this more seriously, because I think you would get much better quality.
Officeworks.
Yeah.
Some of them do have them, but I don't think they're in every shop. I don't think you'll find them wherever you want. So it might be in like the flagship store in the city might have one or something like that.
Yeah. And look, that's a model that has been pursued online. You can there's numerous places that you can send someone a design and they will 3D print it for you and mail it to you and so on. The problem with that is that that's still very much in that enthusiast space. You've still got to think, well, I really want to 3D print that Dalek, but I don't have a 3D printer myself, so I'll pay someone $10 to do it for me, and the copyright be buggered. But to get this into kind of mass market, to get this into homes in the same way that an awful lot of homes now still do have a printer, to get it to that level, I think we need the technology to improve more so, in a sense, more so than the cost to come down.
I think there's a long way to go before any kind of affordable budget home 3D printer is going to be as easy and simple and foolproof to use as a normal printer.
Damn it, but I want my Star Trek replicator now.
Yeah, well, you can try and print it, and 5 prints later when it hasn't worked and you figured out that the bed needs calibrating even though they said it didn't, and you're not using a good kind of plastic, and the model that you downloaded needs to be translated and blah, blah, blah. It really is still a hobbyist thing. You need to be enthusiastic about it. You need to learn from your mistakes. If you're not prepared to sink time and effort into it, you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
Speaking of learning from mistakes, and this is going to be the smoothest segue I do all year, the NDN.
Whoosh.
Oh, we haven't learned a lot there, have we?
Just roll straight past like a segue. That's pretty much disaster number 1, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a new thing this year because everything that's gone wrong with the NBN...
it's been a disaster for a long time, let's be honest.
But everything that went wrong this year was predictable based on the technology mix that we've ended up with, like based on the current approach. Not to say that the merits of the previous approach were complete. Picks up the actual, the HFC cable, which was supposed to be, hey, this is good and this is happening, and then we're all old enough to remember when that stuff actually got installed. So. Yeah.
And people have been saying for a long time that particularly the Optus cable is not up to the job. It needs a major upgrade just to be any good today, let alone what they want to do with it next. But the really frustrating thing is as they were talking about all this, anyone who raised all the problems they're having now got shouted down. And now it's like, you know what? I think I told you so. I feel entitled to say, I told you so. We told
But I told you so
these
does
problems...
not build us a solid,
You know, if we got sold a land,
Not
if we
fit for
bought
purpose,
it through
yeah.
PayPal, yeah, we'd get it on our credit card. We'd get it back as not fit for purpose. But sadly, it doesn't work that way.
It's just depressing. It all went wrong back when Telstra got privatised. Because if we had separated out the copper, then the whole story would have been different. So
yeah,
it's just,
I agree with that.
It's such a long
disaster, a long time in the making.
Exactly, and at this point, it's really hard to see how we get back from it. That's what depresses me. It's just like, well, how is this going to improve? Like, how are we going to solve this issue? Because somebody who came along and said, right, we should actually have fibre all around the house, you're just basically saying, well, let's ignore everything we've just done for the last 10 years. So, yeah, I don't want to...
place. Like, they made what was probably a good decision not to let Telstra build the NBN. This is a while ago now when Rudd said, right, we're going to do it ourselves. But as you say, the reason why they had to do that is because Telstra was holding the entire country to ransom because we let it continue to control the copper after it was privatised. So it actually makes sense to say, right, let's not let Telstra build it and therefore hold the country to ransom for another generation. Let's do it differently. But if you'd gone back and separated it out to begin with, whoever owned the copper not being controlled by the largest retailer, you might have full well trusted them to say, yeah, you guys build it, because you've got no vested interest in screwing over one lot of retailers to favour the others. So it's just been compounded mistakes forcing us to make bad decisions because of the other bad decisions we made.
Yeah.
And they were told in the bit, but with people shouting the whole way along, this is a bad idea, this is not going to work, here's the reasons why, and often being shouted down for it.
So on that happy note, 2016 beckons.
Merry Christmas.
Are there technologies that we're looking forward to? Are there things that we think are going to happen? Because prediction is a dangerous game.
Yes.
Are there things that we think are going to happen in 2016 which will be exciting in tech, which will engage and make us happy when we do this again in 12 months' time?
The consumer VR headsets. The PlayStation VR, the HTC Vive, the Oculus Rift should actually really go on sale next year. And I've played with them all, and some are better than others, but I'm really keen to see what they can do with them in the wild.
Yeah, I think I'd join you on that one, although with the obvious cautionary note for those of us with slightly wonky eyes, that they're also a great solution if you've got some food that you no longer want to be digesting.
Captain Queasy here doesn't handle it so well.
Yeah, I don't think I'm alone in this room in that particular setup either.
Absolutely, I would be ripping mine off even before Alex was ripping off his. So
it's a genetic thing, is that what you're telling me?
I think to some extent possibly, but you know, so if we're influencers and early adopters, then it doesn't bode well for the industry. So...
See, what I'd like to see in 2016, and I alluded to this earlier, is decent 3D printing. Decent, affordable, better quality 3D printing that kind of delivers on that promise and starts to do new things with it. It's lovely that I can use it to print chess pieces. That's kind of cool. It's slightly worrying that people have worked out how to use them to print guns, but I want to have that setup where instead of thinking, right, well, I've got to go down to the hardware shop because I need this set of bolts, or I've got to get this thing, or you know, I need to print a small stand to hold the phone in or whatever, just to be able to say, right, fine, do it, I'll wake up the next morning and it's done in a reliable way where I don't come back and there's just a mess of glue and little fibrous strands that have misprinted, which unfortunately, you know, with 3D printing right now is so much of the case. Or
worse yet, it's just not precise enough, and that's the real problem is precision. And as you say, rather than getting better printers getting cheaper, we're just getting cheaper printers, and things like precision are the things that go, which means all these jobs that it might be practical for, like printing replacement parts and tools and stuff like that, aren't really feasible. You're left printing trinkets because you can't print anything more accurate.
Gus, anything you're looking forward to?
Well, I'm going to be interested, and we touched on this in the news at the top of the show, to see how the whole payment space kicks out, because we will have next year in Australia, we'll have the two big guns going along, with Apple Pay and with Android Pay and with a bit of Samsung on the side. So I'm going to be interested to see that. at the same time, not to try and bring back the note of cynicism again, but I don't know whether people in Australia will rush to embrace it because unlike the other markets where this has come out, particularly the US, we're already pretty good on this. Like 70% of card transactions now are already done with, tap and pay kind of alternative.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether, no one's saying going, oh, damn, I can't do this. Undoubtedly, it's better if you can do it with your phone and there's one less card you've got to carry. So I think we're going to see more adoption. But the fact that everyone's getting mega excited, I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't know whether it's going to be such a big thing here because it feels to me like we've all said, look, that's already working in the piece of plastic in my wallet that my bank paid for. I'm kind of happy with that.
Would you really be brave enough to leave your credit card at home and trust this stuff to work everywhere you need to buy something?
Not on a long extended trip, no.
I wouldn't even be on a trip to the
Although
supermarket.
that does touch on the one big benefit, I guess, if these technologies do come to market, even if a lot of Australians ignore them, which is that if our banks support them, it gets a lot easier if you're travelling overseas in countries that also support them. Well, that just about wraps it up for this episode of Vertical Hold and for the year. Special thanks to Angus Kidman for joining us on short notice.
A pleasure.
We'll be back early in the new year. If you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button.